Hello everyone and welcome to the MERN Stack. In this video we will be building a spreadsheet application using only HTML, CSS and JavaScript will be only around 250 lines of code. Using just that we will be creating this spreadsheet application, this beautiful one. Here we can type name, class, we can type 1, 2, 3, whatever you like, test 2, just like a real spreadsheet application. You can type the data, okay, and then after typing the data you can export. As you can see, also the cells, they are highlighting here, and the header colors, they are changing everything dynamically, and all of these are generated using JavaScript. So major part of the application is using JavaScript. So I can export the spreadsheet by clicking. It downloads a CSV file. I can import it in Microsoft Word. Okay, it's opening up in an application, spreadsheet application. So this one here, it has opened. So as you can see, name, class, 3, whatever I typed here, I could use it in my spreadsheet application. So this will give you a good idea of using JavaScript, plus also how it will give you an insight how this application like sheets.google.com, the complete online spreadsheet, how it was built or how the things are. So let's get started. The working code for this application has been uploaded in Github. The link is there in the video description below. So if you face any trouble when coding this application, please check out the repository link below in the video description. So first create a new folder and name it Excel clone. You can name it whatever you like. Then open up your favorite code editor. Use VS Code, which I recommend. And drag and drop the folder here, or open up the project folder in your code editor. And now here we will create 3 files as usual for vanilla JavaScript projects. So index.html, script.js for our JavaScript code, and then style.css, so we can put the basic styling whenever we need it. And now we will write the basic boilerplate code using HTML:5 shorthand for VS Code, and here I'll put the title as Excel clone. And now just save it, and let me just put a text Excel clone, and let us just spin it up in the browser. I'll use live server extension, open up with live server. You can install that for VS Code, or if you don't have live server extension, you can simply open index.html in your browser and then check the output. So here we have Excel clone, and now we are ready to go. Let me a little bit zoom it up. Okay, 125%. So now let us start writing our code and style files. So first let's link the script, style.css, and link the JavaScript file, script and styles, script src, script.js. Now we'll define a container element here. Div has spreadsheet container, where all the cells that we generate dynamically will go here. So now let us go to our script file, and we don't need HTML file for now, so we'll close it. Okay, so in the script file, first you reference the elements. Say, what was it? Spreadsheet container, using the query selector function. Query selector has spreadsheet container. So we'll use it to display the elements that we create dynamically. And now also let us define number of rows and number of columns. Columns and rows will be 10. I just like to say it calls. So now we'll run a loop. We'll define a function, init spreadsheet. So this init spreadsheet function will be called here, and here whatever code we write will run in the beginning whenever the script runs. So here I will run a loop. I starts from 0, I less than calls, so that we can populate the spreadsheet. I plus plus. Same we need to copy for j. Instead of I, it will be j. So it's j now. And here we have to also create an object representation in our JavaScript file, which will store the state of the spreadsheet, whether what the spreadsheet has, what data it has, and which column and row it is. For each of the cell we have to store the data, and that will be represented using an array. So I'll call it spreadsheet. So which will be an array. It will be actually a 2-dimensional array. So something like this. Here in spreadsheet I will push the rows. The row, each of the row I will push here. So I can say spreadsheet row or something like this. Spreadsheet row, and the spreadsheet row will be defined above. Each of the spreadsheet row will be, say, an array. Now here you have to actually push the spreadsheet row. Here to push each of the item, and at last the spreadsheet row will be pushed here, something like this. I'll just show you in a second in console log. if you see the log here, CLG, it should contain data of numbers, say I plus j something. We want it to be a string separated by a hyphen. If you simply check by reloading, you should see an array of 10 elements. As you know, there are 10 rows defined by 10, and each of the rows should have 10 columns, since this j loop is running 10 times for each of them. So if you open up the array, you can see 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, then for second one we have 1, 0, 1, 1. So this is the currently storing simple strings. What we actually want to store is objects. Each of these items in these inner elements of array, we can see that they are primitive strings. We want them to be object which will store properties like is header or not, is disabled or not, is active or not, what is the row, what is the column. All those important properties will be stored here so that we can do more processing whenever we display the data. So now we will go with defining the structure for our cell. Each cell will be an object, and that object will have certain properties. That's what we're going to define now. Okay, so let us define this class here, class cell. So this class we will use to create objects. So now cell, in this class we will create a constructor so that we can receive the values for the properties. First will be is header or not. Then second is disabled or not. Then we'll say data of the cell. Then the row number, column name or row name, whatever, row identifier and column identifier. And then is active or not. That's also one property we may store if we wish to. Say active is false by default. Alright, so here we'll have this is header equals to is header. And we have to simply copy it for other properties. So it's created for each of the objects. Just copy them. And then we have active. So this is a class cell, and now we need to create this class whenever we are creating this spreadsheet. So now instead of here, we'll pass the cell, where each of the cell will be defined by new cell, where the properties that we send is header or not. For now we'll say is header is false, disabled is false, so it's enabled by default. Then we need data, row and column. The data we want it to be, say, alright, just like before we are putting hyphens. We want to store the data of this I and j, then row. The row will be I and the column will be j for now, and active is false. So this will be the cell. Now if we see we have error, cannot access cell before initialization. That's true because this function is running before we are defining the class. So we want all the definitions to be at the top. So let us bring this function down here in its spreadsheet. And now we can see array of 10 elements. Now each of the element is a cell object, is of the type cell. Now it has properties like data, active, false. This will help us more whenever we render those cells. We create a separate function for rendering them. So now you can see there are 10 arrays inside this spreadsheet object, spreadsheet array in fact, and each of those arrays is again an array of items, array of objects, array of cells. So with this we have to now define the logic for rendering the cells, because we want to see something on the screen. As you can see, it's empty and pretty much not looking good at all. We can only see the console. So let us go with defining the function for rendering them. So for rendering the cell, let us define a function that will create a div element for each cell. So create cell element el. So I like to suffix the el word to mean that it's an HTML element. So here to create the cell element, we want the cell data here. So we want it to receive this as an argument. So depending on the argument, we will create the element. So first, cell element will be under the cell equals to document dot create element cell el, basically document dot create element, which will be a div, and this cell element will have a class name so that we can style using CSS. So we want to give it a class name cell. Alright, we also want to give it an ID so that we can dynamically select it easily. Cell element dot ID equals to, and the ID we want to be based on the column and cell number. So cell dot column, as you know, there is a property called column, cell dot column, because cell is an object, and this object, whenever we pass to this function, this will contain all the properties that we defined. Cell dot column and cell dot row. We want it to have cell underscore, something like this. So this is our cell ID, and it's a div element. We want its inner sorry, 1 minute. It's an input element, it's not going to be div element, because we want each of the cell to be editable, right? Whenever we click on it, we want to type there, we want to put some values there, so it has to be input. So now after this, cell element will have a value. The value will be cell.data. Whatever data we put here, example I plus j plus this will become the value for the input. And now whether it's disabled or not, this data will come from this cell.disabled. So if it is disabled, the input element will also become disabled. And with this, for now, we want to simply return the cell element. The later values like is header or not, all this logic we will define later. So if it is header, its color should be gray, something like this. As you know, in Excel, the top and the left first column, like 1, 2, 3, 4, those rows and A, B, C, D columns, those are a little bit different in color. They are differentiated from the usual cells. So for now, we'll not do that. We'll do a little bit later. So, but we have defined all this, cell, etc. And with this, let us use this function. We have to create another function now called render function, or say draw sheet. Draw sheet or render function. Draw sheet is fine, no problem. Now in draw sheet, again we have to loop through each of the elements I less than. So this time we will not say rows and columns. This time we will say spreadsheet.length. Spreadsheet.length will mean the number of rows, because we have already defined a spreadsheet using init spreadsheet. So this function drawSheet is meant to be called after that initialization function and not before that. So I plus plus, and here we will have, there is some syntax error. I starts at 0. So now same thing for j. So instead of spreadsheet length, it will be spreadsheet I. As you know, each of the elements is also another array. So we have to loop again through that array to get access to all the cells. So these things become a little bit confusing in matrix whenever you do processing like that, loop inside loops. So with this, we have to append element to this spreadsheet container. So this spreadsheet container will say append, and in append we will pass create cell element, and here we'll pass the cell. As you know, its cell is equal to the spreadsheet I, then the j. If you want to pick a particular element from this array, you have to first access the outer array, and then you have to access the inner array element index. So that's why it's I, then j after that. Now you have to pass the cell, and with this you should have an HTML element, spreadsheet container. We see nothing because we have no borders, nothing. But let us simply check it if we have something at all. As you can see, spreadsheet container, nothing is there because simply we have not called this drawSheet at all. DrawSheet function must be called after init spreadsheet. So we can also put this drawSheet function inside init spreadsheet so that it's guaranteed to run after this loop. Now if we save it, you should see something like this. You can see a ton of input elements with 0, 1, 0, 2. It's kind of looks like spreadsheet, but not that clean. So we want to group each of them based on rows. Okay. Now if you inspect the elements, you will find that the elements are arbitrarily placed. Not arbitrarily, but they're just placed linearly, one after the other, one after the other. As you can see, we want to group them row wise. Okay. Example, first row cell elements, say these 10 of them should be inside a div element. Then the next row element should be inside another div element. So in this way we want to group them so that we can style them using flex, and it also has many other benefits. It's more organized. So for that, we can do this. If we create an element here, say const row container L equals to document.create element, create element. This time it will be a div element. It's not an input element. So this row container element, we want to push, we want to give it a class name first. Class name equals to cell hyphen row. So we can style using CSS. And now row container, instead of pushing, alright, we don't have to define here. I'm defining the wrong place. This code is supposed to be inside the draw function. This is related to our state and data logic, and this is related to our rendering logic, the drawing stuff, all of this. So row container element is this. We want to append each of the elements inside this row container, and at last for each of the rows which is in the outer loop, we want to append it inside the spreadsheet. So it is not linear anymore and it's more organized. So append is also fine. I think I get confused sometimes. The function may also be append child, I'm not sure, you can check it out. So row container, this spreadsheet container, we have attached it. Now if we check again by inspecting, you should see that the elements should be grouped now. As you can see, inside spreadsheet container we have cell row, and each of these cell row has 10 cell elements depending on the number of cells that you've defined. So it's just like the array. If you go in console, you can see there is an outer array inside this. Inside each of those areas, again we have an array of elements. So it's just like that. So now with this, let us go with styling and make it a little bit better in looks. Okay, so since you know that each of these elements, first of all, the container is spreadsheet container, and each of these cells are grouped inside a cell row. So this cell row, we can make a div this element as flex. If we make it flex, all of those elements will be in a single line, and it will be easier for us. So we can say cell row, I guess. Cell row, yeah. Cell row will be display flex. Let's see what you get. You can see there are 10 of them, but we have a scroll bar here. We don't want them to be so much wide, so we want to fix a width and height. Cell will have width of 60 pixels and height of say 40 pixels. 40 pixels will be too much. I can see on the left of my monitor screen. So it's appearing like this now. You can see it needs to be a little bit wider, which should be 70. Then it will be more beautiful. Okay, so that's fine. But the problem is that we can see there is already data here. We don't want to show data currently. It's looking ugly, so let us comment out this part. Let's just let it be empty for now. So this data here, let's see, where did you push the data? Here. In new cell, we want the cell data to define here. Cell data. And we don't want to use it for now. We want to just say empty string. If we need it in future, we will use it. So now you can see it's already looking like spreadsheet. Let us do more styling here by adding borders and making it look more better. So here I will add a border 2 pixel solid hash, or I just want to say, so it will be dark gray like this. As you can see now, it's more solid and looking more better. Now for each of the focused element, I don't want the outline here. Outline in none. Now if you click, there is no outline, but we want the border color to change, like we want it to be dark blue whenever it's focused. As you know, each cell is an input element, so we have access to focus. I think it's single colon or double colon. Let's find out. Single colon. So in focus, we want border color to be dodger blue. Dodger blue. So now if you click, it's dodger blue, but it's not that much visible. So we want the border width to be 3 pixel. So it's very thick, as you can see, and it's changing the structure of our cell. So for this, we want to put box sizing. So border box. Box sizing border box. This will ensure us that we are not the cell design. Okay, the border spacing actually takes whatever width we are defining here, and not any extra width and height. So that's what border box sizing is for. So now you can see each cell is looking good now, pretty clean, and we can also type here. We want the size to be a slightly larger. Example, width to be 80 and height to be 40. So this is how it works now. Now we are ready to define our headers. We want to display the header labels like A, B, C, D for how many rows we have. Till Z we will define. Then we want to define 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. And let's do it. Okay, so now we need to define the logic for our headers. Here we need to display 1, 2, 3, 4 for rows, and here A, B, C, D for columns. So first we will simply try to display numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that in the header, because it will be simpler. Later, whenever we will need letters, we will change it. So here the condition is that if it is the first row, the I will be 0 here. I mean the column, as you know, is 0, column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. Same again, it repeats, column 0, column 1. So for each of the column 0, we can simply display the row number here. So that's what we're gonna do. So what we'll say, if j is equal to 0, which is the first column, we simply want cell data to be the row number. Okay, row 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. So then we can display the cell data here. Cell data is usually these numbers. So these numbers we don't want, so let me make it empty string initially. So now you can see we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. up till 9. We don't want to display if it is 0. So if cell data happens to be 0, if cell data is not greater, if greater than 0, or sorry, if less than or equal to 0, then we want cell data to be empty string. Alright, so we will display from 1, 2, 3, 4. Same way we will do for the columns. As you know, all these columns are in the first row, which means I equals to 0. So when I equals to 0 here, if I equals to 0, then we want cell data to be the column number, okay, not row number, because row number is 0 for all of them. So the column numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 0 is not appearing here because we have this condition, as you can see down here. It's less than or equal to 0, then cell data must be empty. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, alright, we have all these elements. So now we want to display letters and not numbers. So we will define an array of letters. So const letters, or say alphabets. We want to display alphabets starting with A, B, C, D. So you fill it up. I'm pausing this video and resuming it when I finish typing. Okay, so here I have typed all the alphabets till Z. Actually, this is not the way how you generate. In spreadsheet, they generate things dynamically, like after Z it comes AA, then AB, so it's infinite. But for our small purpose, it's fully enough. So if I save it, now the pretty file will bring it down, which will be taking up a lot of space. So let me collapse it up. So A till Z I have defined the alphabets. Now I can simply use the indexes in alphabets to show the cell data. So if it is the first row, this one for column, so I can say alphabets J. I can simply pass the index. This will show me A, B, C, D. But as you can see, this first one should not be A. So I'm subtracting 1 here. So it starts from undefined. It's undefined. As you know, the first element is not there. So it's undefined. So here the cell data should not be undefined. What we want, if cell data is present, something like this. If cell data is present, let's see, displays or not. If cell data is, if cell data is not present, we want it to be empty, which means undefined. If it is undefined, we will not show here, and also we were showing from A, B, C, D. Okay, if we don't subtract this, we will see that it will start from B. It will start from here actually. It will not start from B. So we want to subtract 1 here. So that array index -1 is undefined, array index 0 is A, array index second is B. So something like that. So this helps us to render. You can think a little bit on it if you are confused. Just stare at the code and think why it's working. So 1, 2, 3, these are the rows, and now these are headers. So we want to define a variable now, is header or not. So let is header equals to false by default. Other cells should not be header. But if it is this first row, then it's a header. It's true. Then if it is the first column, okay, for each of the row, if these are the columns, so is header is true, whatever the case is. And it is disabled or not. Is disabled. I'll simply say disabled. We'll use it to disable the input. By default it's false. But if it's a header, we don't want it to be editable, like see add this here. We don't want to type, so we want to use this property. We want to use this property to disable the input. So disabled is true. As you know, wherever we are rendering, we have already been using here cell.disabled is disabled if this property is true. So here we want to make true for those headers, row header and cell header. In fact, disable is true. Save it. Now simply pass this disabled value here. So now you should see that these are not editable anymore, because whenever we are rendering, we are using these actual properties of disabled property. And this first one is also disabled, in fact, because this merges with the data. But we are simply not rendering the value, but this value comes under this condition, I equals to 0 and also j equals to 0. Both these conditions, in fact. So now we want to style a little bit differently. We want to give them a gray color. So that we can do here by checking the condition if it is a header. So if cell element, not cell element, cell object is a header, then we simply want to have cell element dot class list dot add. We want to add a class name header. So now you can style here. As you can see by inspecting the element, you will see that it should have a header class. All of them have header class, but this one will not have header class because this is just a normal cell. So if it is a header class, so cell.header, if it is a header class, then we simply want to give background of light gray. Let's say triple D. You can see it's pretty much looking cool. We also want the headers to be center aligned, so we will say text align center. Now with this, your layout is finished. Now we want to store the values that we type, and we want to also highlight these headers. This is one of the features that you will learn. So we'll use event handlers for that. Whenever we click on it and whenever we type, we want to save the values to the cells that we have created initially in the init function. That all this data, as you know, are stored inside spreadsheet. Okay, so that we will do now. Okay, also before we store, before we highlight these headers on event listener clicks, I want to store two more properties named row name and column name. So currently we are simply storing column index and row index. Example, this is 0, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, then this is 1, 4, 2, 4. Like that, these indexes we are storing here, but we are not storing the column names, say C or D, like that. We are not storing exactly for the cells. If you check cells from any other column and row, you can see we are just storing the indexes, like column index is 3, row index is 3. Okay, so these are not numbers, these are actually indexes, array indexes, which will be used for retrieving elements from the spreadsheet array. So what we also want for display purpose, example, whenever I select this, it should show above that it's selected. We are selecting the C3 column or D3 column, whatever it is. So to do that, let us store these two properties, column name and row name. So simply I will extend this object by receiving two more properties, row name and column name. So here row name will be whatever we pass here. So row name and column name, let me delete this up, column name. So on defining that, we also need to pass this data, of course. So let us define the row name and column name here, const row name, and then the const column name, column name. So ij row name, column name. So row name and column name is empty for now. What I want to do in row name, I simply want to store exactly the row that we have. So the row name, exactly, I want to store I, which means that for this first one it will be 0, for the second row it will be 1, 2, 3, so it will exactly map properly with whatever row name here on the sides, right? If it is 1, 2 or 3, whatever it is. And then the column name should be A, B, C, D, so we have to use the alphabets label, which we have right here. So I'll simply copy it up and simply paste it here. And the row name and column name, which we have already passed, it should work now. Now if you check the array, don't check the first one. If you check the first one, yeah, you can check it. You will find that the column names are kind of undefined, because of course this first one, yeah, row name is 0, but the column name is undefined. But let us check for the second one. Column name is C, B and A, because this first one is not this. The first one is this empty cell right here. It has no column name, so this one is undefined, and row is also 0. But for the other cells, they should be mapped properly. Column name E, column name F. Same for other cells. You can see the row name, row number, row name and row index, both are same, because they happen to be same somehow since they are using numeric indexes. But if you check the column names, column name is A for it, which means this one right here, A5. So this cell right here. So it's also same as column 1 and row number 5. So this is being mapped properly. Now we have to add the event listeners for highlighting these headers. So the place where we are creating this element, there itself we have to attach the event listener. So the event listener that you have is this one right here. Also, one thing right here, whenever we are drawing sheet, we want to first clear up the elements. So this row container element right here, not row container, this spreadsheet container, we want to first clear up so that whenever we redraw in future, not plus equal, whenever we redraw in future, we draw from the empty state. Okay, so now the place we are creating the cell element right here, we want to attach the event listener. So cell element dot on click. So on click handle cell click, something like that we will name here. And what we will do here, we will pass the cell information here. So now let us define the function handle cell click. So we will get the cell whichever it was clicked right here. We will get the cell event on click. By the way, it should be a function a function that calls the handle cell click by passing this data. So this will be called with the cell that was clicked. So now I can console log click cell is equal to comma cell. Now if I check the log by clicking some cell element, I should see the data here. If I click this, click cell, yeah, the cell that was clicked was C3. If I click C2, you can see C, column name is C, row index is 2, row name is also 2, column index is 3. So we get the data here whenever we click a cell. Now we want to highlight the headers. To highlight the headers, you have to find the header, okay? To find this header for a particular cell, you simply have to use the column index and the row index will be 0. So the header, say column header, will be spreadsheet. Since you know spreadsheet is the container, it contains all the array elements of our spreadsheet, contains all the data with multiple properties like is header or not, is the ID, the value, etc. So the spreadsheet right here, the row is always 0, as you know. For the column headers, they are always at the top, but the column will be the column index of the cell. So this is the column header, and same way for row header, as you know, the column is always 0, right? And the row number is whatever number row of the cell it is, cell.row, and the column is always 0. So now if you log it, click cell, column header, column, column header, and then row header, row header. Now if you check each of these, you will find that whenever you click column header is not defined. There's an error right here. So column, the spelling is wrong, there was a typo. So after fixing the spelling, it should work now. The column header, as you can see, is row 0 and column 3, which means it's pointing to this one. And in the same case, for the row header, it should be 6 and the first column. Alright, so having this done, we need to select the elements. We need to select these HTML elements and then highlight them. Element from row number, row index and column index, we will define a tiny function, get element from row col. So here we'll pass the row index and the column index. So here we will simply do return that's my spreadsheet. We have to select based on ID. As you know, whenever we created a cell, we defined a unique ID for each of the cells. If you check the, if you inspect it, you will find that each of the elements is cell underscore 12, cell underscore 42. So the first value is the row index and the second value is the column index. So here you can see, now if you return, you simply have to return the element document.query selector. You use query selector here, and first you have to put hash, and as you know, it starts with cell underscore for IDs of each of the cells. So you have to use cell underscore, then you have to concatenate the row index and the column index. So that's how we do it. So after doing this, we simply return the element. So this will give us the element based on the row index and column index. It will give us the HTML reference element DOM node. So you can say column header L. As I already said, I like to prefix it. The row and this, I can simply use column header dot row, column header dot column. In the similar way, I can say row header elements, and here instead of column header, I simply need to replace it by row header, row and column. Now instead of logging the column header and row header, I'll simply log the element versions, HTML element versions, command D. So now after we have saved it, if we check, we'll find row header element is this, and this is the row header. You can see the browser, Chrome browser, is already highlighting this input element based on ID. So this is our column header element, which is kind of confusing because 03 is actually not that. Let's see where we have defined the ID. In ID we are defining inversely. We are defining first the column and then the row, which is a little bit problem. Let us reverse this logic. First we will define row, then we column. So whenever I click this, this is the column header, this is the row header. Now it's pointing properly. Now here we simply want to add classes so that they are active. I want to add active classes, in fact. So here simply this in this element, I'll say the class list dot add active. Same way, row header element, I want to add active class. Now this active class, as you know, in header, if it is present, then this will run. So here I want to give a background in active classes, Dodger blue, DODGER, Dodger blue, and then I want to give a color of white so that the fonts are properly visible. So color white. Now whenever I tap on the cell, you can see that the cell is being active, but the problem is that the old ones are not being cleared. So we want to clear all the active classes first before highlighting a particular one. So we have to run through a loop to select all the headers, or we can define a function, say clear header active states. So we can simply call this function here before getting anything. So here we have to get all the headers, cons headers. You have to get all the headers, and then you have to loop through all of them and remove this active class if it is present at all. So what we'll do, we'll select spreadsheet, then we have to loop through the spreadsheet actually. So for let I equals to 0, just like the previous loop, we can simply copy the for loop. So this for loop right here, we can simply copy it and paste it right here. Then here we can say we don't need this is not required, ing is required. So in this inner one, if the spreadsheet item, so if cell, which is spreadsheet I and j, if cell dot is header, as you know, each of the cell is an object and it has is header property. If it is a header, or yeah, if it's a header but not disabled, by the way. Okay, if it's a header, we want to remove all the active classes. So we have to get the element from cell just like before. So we can say cell element, that particular cell element, that header element. So whenever we're looping only for these true elements, like whenever it's a header, we want to get that particular element where we are looping at using this function get L from row call. We want to say cell dot row and cell dot call, column, not call. It's a little bit confusing because the naming scheme is not that consistent. So this is the cell element, and in cell element, if we have class list, we just want to remove class list dot remove active. So this will clear all the header active states. Now if we select, yeah, as you can see, all the previous ones are being cleared, and now we can type whatever we like to type. That's it. The problem is that we are not storing the data here. If whatever you type here, it's not stored in the object, it's not synchronized. If you have used the framework React in frontend, as you know, the state and the DOM, they are synchronized. They are in sync with each other. Whatever you type in the input is also stored in the state. So here in our state for all the cells, if you reload, in our spreadsheet, if we type something and check spreadsheet later, the data will still be empty. Although we are not logging it, we still know it's going to be empty because we are not updating the data. So we want to also update the data. To prove you that it's empty, even if after we type in these cells, we can create a button here, and anyways we'll need a button in future so that we can we can download the spreadsheet. So we can do that. So let us create the button right now itself and add the event listeners, and later we'll create the download functionality, of course. But for now, we need to do the work. Since we've done the work of highlighting these cells, we need to do the work of saving the data in our state. And yeah, before I do that, I want to highlight this active cell actually. To highlight the active cell, again, I have to add a class. I don't have to add the class, sorry. I simply have to go to this focus selector here, and I can simply give a background color of, say, light gray, say triple E. Now, whenever it's focused, or I can give a slight darker color, triple D. That would be better. Yeah, that's more kind of visible. Alright, that's fully fine. Let's go on with defining our button in index.html to log out the values whenever we click on it. So I will say button here, download or export spreadsheet. Export spreadsheet. Here we'll class export button, export btn. You can see the button is already here, but it has no styling. So let us add the styling. Export btn, sorry, it's export btn. Yeah, class is export btn. I don't want to add class, I want to add id export btn so that I can also select with JavaScript easily. Hash export btn. And now here I want its background to be Same, dodger blue or light green, kind of green, color white, it will look good, just like Excel, how it looks. You can see it's looking retro. We need to remove the borders and add some padding. Border none, padding equals to 10 pixels. It's looking cleaner, just like Excel, it looks very good. And this button is not clickable. What I want margin below it, so I want to make display inline block. Margin bottom equals to 10 pixel. So now there is a margin bottom of 10 pixel and we still cannot click. Cursor, let me add some pointer. It will look better. Okay, now whenever I click export spreadsheet, something should happen. So here I will add an event listener. So let me first select the element here. Export btn, document query selector has export btn. So I can add the event listener wherever I like. Let me add above itself to avoid confusion. Export btn.onClick function. In this function here, we'll get an event listener, of course, event object, and in export btn we simply want to, for now, console log our spreadsheet. Okay, so this other console logs, like we don't want to populate, so click cell, all this I want to comment out so that the console is clean. Now if I check by reloading, okay, now if I export spreadsheet, I can see the logs. Now you can see initially the data is empty right here for all of them, but if you type on this column A and row 1, if you type on this and if you type on some of this, and if you check again by clicking export spreadsheet, as you can see this one, it's just row 1 and row index is 1, column index is also 1, which means row 1, this one here column index 1, if you check here, the data is still empty, because of course we are not updating on change of the input. So that's why we have to add input on change event listener. So this cell element here is an input, but as you know, these are disabled, so I cannot click on them, so we cannot anyways edit on them. But since the ones which are not disabled, they are editable, so we have to add on change event. So here we'll send event handle on change. So whenever we type input, we want to send the cell and update the cell value. So the cell is right here which we received, so handle on change is cell. We also want to send the data that was typed, so we will send e, then e.target.value is the data. So now let's define the handle on change function. Clear header active states, that's fine. I'll define down here handle on change the data and the cell. So simply you need to do cell.data equals to data, and this should simply save it, and nothing should be done because the cell is an element of array and array elements are passed by reference, so it's not a copy as far as I know. So this is how it should work. So whenever I type something on this and I type something on the row 1 index and column index 0, 1, 2, 3, I type 3. Now if I check by export spreadsheet, I should see on the first one, this one right here, which is row 1, row index 1, this one right here, row index 1, column index 0 and 1, column index is also 1, data is A, D, S, F, D, S, F. If you check the second column, data should be empty and it's true. On the third one, it should be 3. You can see the data is 3. So now we are ready. Now we have our data in sync. Whenever we delete, it should also get deleted, because as you know that we are updating also the cell's data, the cell object's data from the spreadsheet. Now we need to download it, but before that, a slight tiny thing I want to do. Whenever we type something, we can press tabs here. As you can see, tabs will work. There's a little bit issue here. Whenever we type tab, it's not highlighting this active cell. Alright, that's not the big case, but whenever we click, it's working. But if we click enter, we want to remove this highlight. If we click enter, we want to remove the autofocus. So that's also one feature that you would like to do, but for the purpose of this video, it will become longer if we add this feature. So I'm skipping that, and instead I'm going, if you want to implement this feature, take it as a challenge. I have already done that in the previous parts where I was testing this application, but for this case I don't want to do that because you have to add few more cases and conditions to achieve that. what simply I want to do is I want to click this export spreadsheet and then be able to download this spreadsheet so that it can be exported into the Excel, other Excel applications like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, right? So for this, let us go to this function and complete it now. So this, we already have the event listener. If you check here, on click, there should be event listener, export button. If you press find, so we have here on click, and we also have access to this spreadsheet object, the spreadsheet object right here, which is an array of 10 elements. Whenever we click, since we are logging out, we have access to this. Now we want to create CSV out of this data. So CSV means comma separated values, and it's just a format where the columns are separated by commas. If you have A, B, C here, they'll be separated by A, B, C. Then the next one will come in a new line character, /R/N. This is considered as a new line. So if you have some data, it will come as a new line. So CSV, after all, is a single string, is a long string of comma separated values, and each of the lines are separated with /R and /N. So this will generate simply by looping through all of the cells, which are not headers, of course, which are not header. This one, as you know, the headers one are marked as gray. So here we simply need to loop. We can again copy the loop here. You have down here, I don't like typing loops a lot, so you can simply copy up this, clear header active states, and if you come here, simply loop through all of the spreadsheet. First spreadsheet length, then spreadsheet dot ij. So this is each of the cell. So what you want to do, once you get the cell, you know that you can get the data of the cell. So here, let me first define CSV outside. Const CSV equals to empty string. It should be let, not const, by the way. Then here, CSV is not header. If it is not header, only then we are going to add to the CSV plus equals the data right here, which is cell.data. Simply that. Then after that, the data that you have, alright, is a small thing I see here. Instead of doing that complicated things, we can simply get rid of that. Yeah, and if we have this first row, we can simply join all of them with a comma. CSV plus equals this, and then we can add a new line like this. So now each of the columns data will be separated by comma here, and then for each of the rows, this /R/N will be added, which will tell us that we have to create a new line for the CSV. Now here, we don't want to add the headers, so we want to remove the headers from this. So we have to kind of filter. .filter. Also we have to map, by the way, item.data. We want to get the data for each of the items. Okay. Then in filter, we want to get the item where item.isHeader is false. So this is kind of logic. If you check it in the browser one by one, you'll come to know. And let me show you now itself. First of all, I will show you by logging the spreadsheet I. Okay, the spreadsheet I inside the loop. So whenever we click export button, you should see 10 of them. Each of them is outputting a spreadsheet row. Okay, this row contains all of these cells. So each of them is outputting these rows. As you know, the spreadsheet contains array of rows. So this is a row. I gives us the row, but this J element gives us the data for each cell. As you know, this row is an array. Now if we do this second step, as you know, each of these array rows contain the isHeader property. So those headers which are false, only them I want to filter out. So now if you console log, you should find on clicking that we have 9 elements. Instead of having 10 elements, we have 0 to 8, which is 9, and all of them are isHeader false. Okay, because we are not returning the header, we are filtering them. Now what we are getting back is an array of properties, array of objects in fact, where we have these multiple properties. But if we map them, if we want to create array of values, we have to do this way. We have to return only the data property. Now if you check, not in spreadsheet, if you click the spreadsheet, you can see it's an array of data, because each of these objects we have transformed. We have transformed each of the object into a single primitive value using map. You can return anything from map. You can also return data colon item.data if you want to, but for our purpose we need simple string array values. So it's undefined. By the way, it should return an object like this if you are returning at all. So you can see each of them have data like that properties, but we simply want to return a basic value, which is the data. So this is how we do it. So I hope you know this not higher order functions, kind of, yeah, because they take these inner elements, callback functions basically. So that's why. So we have this array of data, but if we type something and click export spreadsheet again, you should see that on some of them, yeah, on the first one we have this data right here. So now we want to join them using the string here. So let me finally copy this so that you see the output. So finally we want to join and add this string at the end. Now if I type something 1 2 3 export spreadsheet, as you can see the values are being joined inside this array with a comma 1 2 3, and for the second row you can see first one is empty, then the second one has this data. Isn't it cool that this has a representation of CSV here? It is indeed. So now we have this console log. Instead of console logging, we want to append to the CSV string. As I have already said, CSV is a long string that contains comma separated values, and each of the row is separated by this, right? Since it's looping for each of the row, so we can directly add here. So this CSV right here, we can finally console log the final CSV actually. So instead of logging individual ones, so let me type again something. And by the way, this is reloading automatically whenever I save, because I'm using the live reload extension of VS Code. So whenever I save, CSV is a long string with \r\n. That's why Chrome is also displaying data like that. Because whenever you console log in Chrome by putting this \n/r/n, it comes down in a new line. Even in C++, if you have done your first programming in terminal, you can see that \n creates a new line. So this CSV data, we just need to create a file now from it, and to do that, we have to create an URL. Okay, we have to create data URL. So first, I'll create CSV object from new blob. It's a blob. It's actually a JavaScript binary large object. It's an API provided by the browser that allows you to work with binary objects. So in blob, you have to pass the data, which is our CSV. So now we can create CSV URL that can be downloaded by clicking the link. So I can do CSV object. I have a property here, URL. URL is a global object available in JavaScript, which has many different APIs. It's related to manipulation of URLs. So here there is a URL called create object URL. I think it was all, yeah, it was create object URL, and here you simply pass the object and we should get the CSV URL. Let me first log it whether it's working or not. CSV URL. So we should see the CSV URL if we type something. So as you can see, this is the URL. If I click this URL, there is an error. You cannot get because it's a server issue. Yeah, of course you cannot get because it's opening up in the server. But what I want to do, create CSV URL, create object URL, that's fine. I want to download it with a href object. So dynamically I want to create an anchor tag here, const a equals to create elements a. Now a.href equals to CSV URL, the data URL that we created, we want to store here. Then a.download, I want to put a download name here, say Excel spreadsheet or exported spreadsheet, and here I'll give the type CSV. Whenever whatever file it will be downloaded, it will have .csv extension so that it's recognized by other applications. Now I simply want to click it. Now if I try it, this spreadsheet, create element is not defined, of course, because it's document.create element. I have to type again, export spreadsheet. You can see it has downloaded on my browser successfully. If I single click to open it, I have an application in my computer. It's called Polaris Office, and it's trying to open with Polaris Office currently. So let's see if it opens. It takes a little bit time. It tells me to buy the extension. Yeah, it already opened behind the scene. not this one. You can see ASDF, DASF, perfectly it has created the output. I think I need to zoom in a little bit. Alright, it's not zoomable. So by the way, that's the thing. Yeah, I can zoom this up a little bit. So this is the output you can see, which I had typed in this application. So let me test one more time. This time I will try to import in Google Sheet. It will work, by the way, because it's CSV after all. So if I create serial number, name, class, okay, class or grade, whatever it is. Serial number 1, 2, 3. It's just like a spreadsheet application now. Grade is 3. Test 5. John will be 11. Now if I try to export the spreadsheet is exported and is downloaded here. So what I can do, I can now simply open Google Sheets. Let me create a new file here, and I will simply hit file, file import. So import, it will take a time, upload. So this is the sheet file I created here. It was exported and downloaded on my computer, and just click import data. Let's see what we get, and you can see that it's coming in the proper order. I skipped the first column and it was properly skipped even here, because while generating CSV we generated it properly. So now this is also a web application, as you know, but it's much more larger scale and much more complex than what we did. But still you got a pretty much good overview using just vanilla JavaScript how you can build a spreadsheet like that and export it. Also, we forgot to do one more thing. We did not display C3, D4. So would you take a little bit time to do it? Let's do it together. It will not take much time, 5 minutes I guess. Let's try it. So here to display C3, D3 like that, that's the last task we're doing. If I click here, it should be E2, so the active cell. So here what I'll do, cell here, I'll display in div, not div, I want it to be spanned so it shows up in a single line. So here I will display the cell name, row name in this. So ID equals to cell status, I'll say simply. So now you should see cell, nothing is there. But now let's use our JavaScript, the power of JavaScript, to display the data. So handle click cell, whenever we are clicking the cell this will run. Here simply we'll say document.query selector, not even 5 minutes, I think it will just take 1 minute. Cell status.inner HTML equals to, as you know, cell is already there, we just need to update the cell status by using the column name which you created. As you know, each of the properties have column name and row name. In spreadsheet we have column name and row name. Now it's going to be useful. First we have to print the column name A3, B3 like that. So the cell is this one, and cell has a property called column name. Then the next one is cell.row name. Now it should not add up. If both are numbers, they may add up. So I want to use string to force them to convert to string. So now if we check by clicking B2, B1, as you can see, it's easily coming and it's very much beautiful. So this is your little cute spreadsheet applications which you have created yourself, and now you can use it to download on the browser, write everything without any library. I hope you like this video. If you liked it, please subscribe to this MERN Stack channel. I'll create more vanilla JavaScript projects like that, and also I will create more React MERN Stack based projects. So for this video, see you later and take care.